Hello, everyone. Welcome to Creativity-Hive's weekly program. My name is Miriam Haugen, and I am part of the Creativity-Hive team. We help budding videographers achieve massive post-production skills through one-on-one teaching and live group coaching. And our weekly Hangout brings you people working in the video industry from across the globe. So be sure and leave a comment. Tell us where you're joining from. And we are today meeting Patrick Inhofer. Hello, Patrick.
Hello, Miriam.
So you are a colorist, and I'm going to, I think that you just need to explain, since not everybody that may be listening to this knows what a colorist does.
So, when I host podcast interviews and I talk to other colorists, my favorite first question is when you're sitting around Thanksgiving dinner and you meet your brother-in-law for the very first time and he says, "What do you do for a living?" What's your answer? And my answer in that situation is Photoshop for video. That's what I do. Whereas a Photoshop artist will spend a half day or a day working on a single still image. In that period of time, I am typically working with as few as 30 images or shots running at 25 frames, 30 frames per second, or up to 500 shots in a day that I've got to get through. So, Photoshop artists will get very, very niggly on every specific detail of the image in front of them. They'll stare at that image, they'll look at that image, they'll break that image down. I don't have that luxury of time. I'm working on right now, I'm working on a travel show. I had 400 shots to do. I got those done in about 9 hours. And so I've got to work very, very quickly. I've got to know exactly what it is my main focus is at any given time. I'm matching shots. I'm making sure that the story stays visually fluid and consistent. My job is to make sure that as I move from the wide shot to the close up to the reverse angle, oftentimes recorded with multiple cameras at once. But different angles have different, the different subjects will have different amount of light. It's all found light, like on the travel show, it's all found light on set. There's very little setup. And so I've got to reduce the work your brain has to do to say, oh yeah, these were all shot at the same time in the same location. And I do that by adjusting white balance and exposure and setting my black points and my highlights and making sure they're visually consistent so that the only thing that anyone is ever noticing is the story. And that's my job, is to allow the story to sing.
Awesome. That is great. We have your a show reel that Mo did a little editing to, but at any rate, these are all bits of shows that you have worked on. So I think we'll show that right now, and then we'll bring Neil and Mo on. Yay! Beautiful.
Thank you, Mo. Nice job on the compilation. You just reminded me I need to update the phone number on the back of that reel. I've been dead for a very long time. Problem with putting contact information on the demo reel that you don't update very often.
Sure, I'll change it for you if you want it. That's cool.
No, I got it. Thanks.
Fantastic.
Well, okay, so give us some contact information here. Maybe you can put it into the chat or something.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my contact information, patrick@mixinglight.com. I mean, that's the easiest way. That's the email I check every day. I will tell you that as far as my color grading is concerned, I haven't updated that reel in about 6 years. I looked at it on Vimeo the other day. It said last updated 6 years ago. And that's because, even I guess the last 5 years or so, most of my work comes through referrals. I don't do a lot of active advertising. I'm not necessarily on the lookout for new jobs and new clients. What I find is the referrals of my existing clients keep me busy enough. And I do a lot of Mixing Light is my kind of training arm of my life. And more, I'm focusing on that. I've been in the business over 30 years. And what I'm finding is I'm really enjoying starting to help other people like me who they've been in the business a long time and they want to help bring other people along, giving them the opportunity to do that. I've got a platform through Mixing Light to do that. And so a lot of my job now is really focused less on, making sure I'm booked, 5 days a week with jobs always coming in. Like, that's not who I am anymore. That's been changing for the last 5 or 6 years. So I haven't felt compelled to even bother looking at my demo reel.
Yeah, sure. I had a look at your history, and your IMDb is that long, right? And what caught my attention was that you began also producing as well as you online edit. So you're an editor as well as a producer on some of the shows and documentaries, etc. Is there a reason you evolved, for lack of a better term, or changed direction to the coloring route, or is it pretty much still producing next to editing, next to coloring?
So producing is probably a generous term for anything I might be credited as a producer on. That's probably the practice project that we produced at Mixing Light as a training resource. So we commissioned actually kind of a mentor, a young gentleman I mentored many years ago. We commissioned him to shoot a short doc for the purpose of having a source project that people can buy, download, and color grade. So for a lot of people who are new to color correction, they're trying to test out the software, they're trying to figure out the skill. And so we've got 2 practice projects up there on mixinglight.com that allows you to do that. You download it and you can work on it. Now, the criticism I've had on that is that it feels like work. And the answer is, it's kind of the point. It's supposed to feel like work. It's, it's to train you how to use that software and how to get comfortable with the tools you're using. So that was my producing experience. I started out as an editor. I graduated from Hofstra University in 1988 with a Bachelor of Science in Film Television Production. Within 2 months, I was working in Manhattan at a post house, and I did that for 10 years. Then I took a year off, and then I came back as a freelancer. And by the time I came back as a freelancer, one of the things that my career developed into was I'd always gone straight to broadcast. So when I started working at these big Manhattan post houses, we'd go, I'd have a producer walk in. They'd give me a sheet with time code numbers, tape numbers, and, the VO track, and I'd be editing it. And then when I finally spit out the master, I'd hand it to the client. He takes it to the network and it goes to air. So it wasn't enough that I was a good storyteller. I also had to produce images that were suitable for broadcast on the major networks. And so I'd always had in the back of my mind, I was always trained at first as an assistant, then as an editor, to pay attention to what your image looks like, look at your scopes, look at the colors, make those adjustments. As you're crafting the story, you're also crafting the visuals and controlling the visuals. And so when I went freelancing, I'm like, I'm in Manhattan, nonlinear editing is exploding. There are a lot of freelance editors. What's the one thing about me that makes me different than a lot of the freelancers I was running up against? The answer was my ability to look at images and deliver not only a quality story, but a quality image.
Okay.
And so what I started doing very quickly is saying, look, you can hire me to edit, but you also have to hire me to spend a day to a day and a half to 2 days doing a color correction pass.
Fantastic.
And it got to the point where I was working on one job where they'd asked me, they said, we love the work you did. The editing's great. But, the producer's like, we just don't want to spend the time on the color grade. And I'm like, that's a mistake. This really needs it. They're like, yeah, but they think it looks good. I said, look, you do whatever you want. But if you don't use my color, if you don't agree to what we already agreed to, which is to hire me for a day and a half to do the color pass, take my name off the credits. They're like, what? Yeah. I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is what I sell. I sell not only my ability to tell a story, but for the images to support that story. And I can't have a project going out with my name on it that isn't color corrected. It's not acceptable.
Yeah, that's absolutely excellent.
Yep. And they sent me home. And then the next day they called me up and said, all right, come on in. You're going to do the grade. And
fantastic.
So I did the grade. Yeah.
So that led you along. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
It's quite an illustrious long journey from what I'm seeing. And then it kind of channeled you into mixing light, which is something that, like, Neil is entrenched in mixing light, and he always talks about it with me, and I'm like, okay, cool. And personally, I love the edit. I love creating a story like you craft the image quality. I love to craft the emotion. I'm not too huge on the coloring side. I leave it to the guys who know it. I could learn it, and I'd love to learn it, but for now, my emphasis is really, and my target is really just the emotion and the edit, making the story sound and look emotive. So when Neil keeps telling me about Mixing Light, so I go to Mixing Light, and I'm not allowed in because I see it's some membership.
It's a membership site, yeah.
And they say, no, you can only be a member. And I'm like, oh, it's some sort of cult, a Mixing Light cult. So Neil says, well, you got to join. So my question is, how did this, you're a co-founder of Mixing Light. How did this actually, there's two questions actually. How did it actually get to the point of becoming something you wanted to develop? And secondly, how did you manage to gain the traction that's made it into what it is today?
Yeah, it's a bit of a road. And it was a process getting there. Mixing Light at this point is 9 years old. Last week, we announced that my other co-founders are stepping away. I'm stepping in as the sole owner and CEO of Mixing Light. And basically, I'm now the single point of accountability on that service, and which is kind of the purpose. We decided someone needed to do that. And we decided that I agreed that probably should be me. And the process was a process. You don't start out that way. You start out like I started out teaching the 3-way color corrector for Final Cut 3 at the Final Cut Pro, New York Final Cut Pro user group. Right. That's how I got started doing this. There was this great 3-way color corrector. I had graded entire series on this, Real Weddings for Oxygen Network back in the early 2000s. They would bring me in from time to time as coverage, and it's all graded on Final Cut 3 using the 3-way color corrector, right? And I found that when I went to these user groups in Manhattan, no one knew how to use the 3-way color corrector. They didn't understand. They thought it was a plugin that you would use as an effect, kind of like a glow thing. And I'm like, no. Y'all are looking at this wrong.
Right.
And so then I started explaining it. And then Michael Vitti, who has passed away now, he departed about 12 years ago. I miss him dearly. He was the president of the New York Final Cut Pro user group. And he brought me in, and I became the treasurer there. And when he passed away, I eventually became the president. And then I started my own online training company called towofcolor.com. At Tao of Color, I was teaching Final Cut all the way up through Final Cut 7. I taught Apple Color. And these were online videos. I mean, this is online video training back when that was really hard to do, before there was a YouTube, right?
Right.
Or YouTube had just started around this time. And it was very difficult to build an audience like this, to build a service like this. You were hobbling stuff together. And I'm not a coder. I'm not building this stuff. So I'm using off-the-shelf hardware and software. And so over time, I kind of built up a small, dedicated audience. And so when my co-founders, Dan Moran and Robbie Carmen, had an idea that they wanted to start a membership website, because I was selling at that point one-off training series, they came to, one of the people they talked to was me. And I'm like, all right, I can do this. I know like how to execute this, but it is hard.
Yeah.
It is a grind. And it's not something one or two people can do. You need at least a team of 3 people, because membership websites, I have a responsibility. And that responsibility is to the audience, to my members, of creating content on a regular enough basis that that subscription revenue, that subscription that they're paying me every month, is justified. And so if we're going to do this for teaching color grading, like, we have to be dedicated to putting out this content. And we did, and we were. And, you know, we put out 3 pieces of content every week for 4 years. It was largely the 3 of us. And then, you know, very quickly, we started bringing in outside contributors. It helped reduce the load on us. And it also expanded the number of voices. There's no one way of doing any of these things. It's like teaching editing, Mo. I'm sure you know that when it comes to putting a scene together, there are a myriad of ways of doing it. And the same thing is true with color grading. Even if you're trying to get to the exact same endpoint, the process you get there to discovering what works and what doesn't can be very, very different depending on who you are. So having multiple voices in a service like what we have at Mixing Light is one of the key foundations and one of the key strengths. And what we discovered, I guess, over the last 5 years is that it's less about the quantity of content. If you want quantity of content, go to YouTube. You'll find tons of content there. The question is what's the quality of that content? And if you're new to something, you don't necessarily know what you're getting until you try to start executing some of this advice. And then you realize it's not working for you. And then you're on this search. Whereas one of the things that we're very proud of in Mixing Light is that every one of our contributors, they're client tested, right? They've been in the business. They've had clients in the room. They understand that color grading is more than just about the image that's on the screen. It's also about managing our clients. It's about hitting delivery deadlines. And it's about the skill that then gets informed by having to manage all of that. And so the workflows and techniques are optimized for that kind of experience. And there's value in that. It means that you're not going down rabbit holes too often. It means that, you know, you're working to get to the end result as quickly as you can without necessarily taking shortcuts. But what's a shortcut and what is a mistake? And sometimes you don't know the difference until you get to the end, and then you figure out what the mistake is. And the job of a service like Mixing Light is, no, that's a mistake, and we can tell you that right off the bat. So here's why you don't want to do that. Do this instead. And when I worked at a big Manhattan post house, that was the whole point of it. Part of the purpose of a post house was to train the new talent coming in. And one of the goals of training the new talent is to take years off their learning curve, to teach them the mistakes not to make.
Right.
So that literally, like, it accelerates your career by years. And so in this age, in this era, especially, you know, post-COVID, in this era where everything becomes decentralized, one of the biggest dangers is all that institutional knowledge dissipates and never gets shared. And so part of what I see the function of Mixing Light is to give experienced professionals an audience who wants that kind of information and can leverage that kind of information.
Fantastic. I'm speechless.
So
It's amazing. It's like you said
that's
everything.
unusual.
Yeah,
Speechless?
I'm never speechless. So it's like you said everything to me in one sentence, and it made complete sense. And I actually admire you for going
So
this huge
I
long route. It's amazing.
am curious if someone wanted to, they thought this is an avenue I really want to get into. Could they simply join Mixing Light and get all the training they need to become a colorist?
So the answer is yes and no. By design, the service is focused on people who are either professionally working or their assistants, right?
Mhm.
If you're brand new and you've never touched any of the tools, actually where I'd point you first is LinkedIn Learning. I've done training for them for about nine years. Actually, when I started Mixing Light, Robbie Carmen, my co-founder of Mixing Light, hooked me up with Linda, who got acquired by LinkedIn Learning, and we started developing resources for them. In fact, this year I've released 3 training titles on LinkedIn Learning for DaVinci Resolve: a quick start, then a workflows title, and then a color page title. And I'd probably point you there. I haven't announced this yet, but I think it's going to happen where that training is going to end up on Mixing Light, because we do need an onboarding component. There was a period of time where we thought we were going to get away from standalone training, but since I've taken over and I've rethought the business model, I think we need an onboarding component as part of the service. And actually today, in about 2 hours, I have a call with our web developer, and that's going to be one of the first things I'm tackling, is how to integrate this in a way that makes sense with the membership, because there are licensing agreements that are part of this. So, yeah, I mean, there's the software and then there's the technique. And to get skillful, you can't be skillful if you don't understand your software, right?
Sure.
But if you understand the software, it doesn't mean you're skillful.
No. All right,
but
great.
I think the software is the necessary foundation to becoming skillful. That's not saying that there aren't colorists out there who really focus just on what's, the control surface in front of them, lift, gamma, gain, shadows, midtones, highlights, and they have tremendously successful careers only focusing on that. But there was a time very early in their career where they were the technician. And, if you've been in the business for 30 years, that first 10 years, you were probably that technician. And then you move into the creative thing. So you're doing that for 10 years where you're kind of hybrid. And then the last 10 years, you're the creative as you've got assistants doing the rest of this. And then you become disconnected, right? Most of the people using our service are not that people who are in the 20th year of their career, right? They're in the first 20 years of their career. And so they need to have a foundation in both the creative and the technical. And we tend to focus more on the technical, although we do have contributors who talk about, their creative approaches to things and their stylistic approaches to things. But the technology can be a very big stumbling block. It's gotten very complicated. And to step into Resolve 17 today versus stepping into Resolve 7 when I got into it, it's a very different piece of software, way more complicated, and a lot more stumbling blocks. And so that's, I think, kind of where one of the things that I think Mixing Light over the next 3 months is going to be solving is giving our members who are onboarding into the craft some more kind of training to get them going so they can take advantage of the rest of the service.
One of the things that I really pushed in my Max class on thinking like a colorist, because Robbie Carmen has been the one at Max, excuse me, teaching the Thinking Like a Colorist class, and he passed that on to me this year. But one of the things that I really felt was important to push is that most people don't really understand the job of the colorist. And you talked about it, Patrick, in your first comments that, but the way I put it was that you have to make a unified visual timeline. That's the whole thing. It's got to flow cut to cut to cut. And if you can't make that unified visual timeline where it all looks like it's one set of eyeballs seeing the whole thing, then it doesn't matter if you can create the greatest look in the world. No one's ever going to hire you because you can't get the job done. And that technical capability of conforming, as it's called, all this media, because you get in most professional jobs, you get media that's all over the freaking place. Now you'll get some stupid phone media along with Red and Sony Venice and this kind of stuff, and you got to try and make it look like it all fits together somehow. And you've got to do it at a freaking tempo that most people would find absolutely insane. And then when you make it all look like one unified thing, now you can make it look pretty or ugly or whatever is the goal.
Gritty.
But gritty.
Don't say ugly.
Gritty. That's a good, thank you. But it's, and that's what I think you're talking about here, is that process of the first years of your career. It's learning all that technical stuff. How do you match this media? How do you do all these things to make it so that it actually works? And so so that someone can put together a final product out of it, because it's a lot more complex than people think it is.
And on top of that, you have to be able to do it on a schedule and a deadline. And you have to get to the point where when someone says, hey, how long is it going to take you to color grade this? You give them some number of hours or days, and you have a reasonable expectation of actually hitting that number, right? So that you don't end up in this thing where, oh, I've got 4 days to do this, and the next thing you know, you're 9 days in, and you just despise the craft and whoever it is you're working. Like, it could be a terrible, terrible black hole, and that you just get sucked into and crushed by the gravity well. And so if you go into Mixing Light, and you can go into our Tutorial Insights library, and there's a categories thing, and you click on business, there are some lectures and webinars that I've given on the anatomy of a color grading job.
Okay.
And it takes any color grading job can be broken down into discrete steps. And if you use that as a template, you can then scale it. Like if you have 2 weeks for a job, or you have 2 days for a job, you can take those steps and assign the number of hours or minutes into each of these steps in order to make sure every shot gets color graded, everything gets looked at, and you still hit your deadline.
Right.
And so a lot of what inexperienced colorists have to learn is how to manage time, not just your software. And managing time means knowing, well, what do I hit first? Am I doing the shot matching now? Am I doing the look creation now? When should I be asking for revisions? Like at what point, if I've given 5 days, how many days before I should be sending up my first set of, my first review for revisions? All of that stuff can help you really start to take what feels like a difficult task or a cryptic task, and then start quantifying how to actually approach it.
And past that, then you have the whole thing of the client in the room and managing clients. And of course, you may have a job that you scheduled that it's going to be 5 days, and the first 3.5 you're working by yourself, and Thursday afternoon, the client comes in and sits down, and now you have to be able to sit and talk with the client through Thursday afternoon and Friday, and of course, some of the things that are quite likely, they come in, sit down, and the guy looks at it and goes, "What the hell did you do there? I don't like that." And how do you handle that? You have to be good with the clients, and that's something I know I would struggle with.
It's the key skill. It's it doesn't matter how good your grade is if your client was expecting something different or had a different vision in their head. You are potentially set up for a failure. Now, that doesn't mean that if a client doesn't like what they see, you can't quickly recover and then be their hero by the end. You absolutely can be. Yep. I mean, I never expect to not get. I am amazed if I ever not get notes. I expect notes. I want notes. Notes tell me that my client is paying attention. The worst note is, I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know what I like.
Yeah. How do you interpret? Else? How do you find out if they say, I want it to look prettier? What does that mean?
So how does it look? So there's a whole thing about, and we talk about this on Mixing Light. Also, we have a bunch of mailbags where we do these podcasts, and we've had discussions about How do you have conversations with your clients? How do you interpret their notes? And how do you talk with a client about color? Because, I like to say that none of us is trained to have a conversation in hue values and saturation
Right.
values, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we just don't do that. I mean, and there's also a physical thing between men and women. Like, men don't have that color perception that women do. It's a physical limitation in our eyes and rods and cones. That's
Yeah.
why, like, my wife goes into the nail salon and she sees 18 shades of red and she's like very particular. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I see the shades.
Yeah.
I don't care which one you go with. They all basically look the same to me, right? But
Right.
for her, and I don't know if it's a cultural thing or a physical thing or a mix of culture and physics.
Yeah, I think there's a physical thing, but Neil will be the exception. He'll be the one that will tell you about all the subtle differences.
The two different shades of pink, and no, that one's not right for you today.
Exactly.
You need the other
And
one. Yeah,
I had
so that's not me.
For many years, I had an optometrist that was just, men don't have good color. And so he was always, every time I'd have my eyes checked, he'd pull out this big book they have of all these color things that trying to find various kinds of color blindness. And he'd whip it up. And some of them, by the time you get halfway through the book, you were looking at color tests that would be really pushing into the weeds of really fine color distinction, but able to do it. And most men couldn't make it halfway through the book. And I'd be at the end of the book just going 29, 30, 32, A, B, X, X, Y, Z, by, and he'd just be looking at me like going, you're not supposed to be able to do this. And I'm going, well, but I can. So why do you keep testing me at it? But he kept trying. He couldn't do it. But yeah, most men can't. Now, of course, the thing though that you mentioned there is of course Pam and her stuff. And one of the things that I really enjoyed, and we like to have people be people here. We had Patrick Palmer, sang and played guitar, which I understand you are not going to be doing.
I am not singing.
And but there is an interesting story in your background of how you got hired for one job.
I mean, one of my first jobs my first job at a big New York City post house. My wife was my boss. She hired me, so she was in charge of duplication. Her clients were the big record companies, Arista, and all the big record companies. And so she would, Janet Jackson had a new music video coming out, and we were making hundreds of copies sent out to television stations and dance clubs all over the country. And oftentimes, she's like taking that videotape and running to the record company's headquarters to hand it to, some famous, musician as they're getting ready to leave to board their plane to get a copy of their most recent music video. And so, yeah, she hired me at my very first job. And after about 3 months in duplication, I got bumped up to editing upstairs as an assistant editor. And I guess a week or two later, she kind of was like, we should go out to a movie. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And the rest is history. It's now, 30 plus years. So yeah, it's been quite the run. But yeah, so when she tells the story, it's a lot more humorous because I don't know, she just tells it a little better. Yeah. But she was a great boss. And, one of the things, she gave me one of the most interesting tests I've ever seen in an interview, which was, so you're hiring someone at kind of an entry-level position at a post house is work in the duplication department. Mm-hmm. But you needed to know how to read scopes, so waveform monitors and vector scopes. And back in the day, what you would do is you'd put up a videotape, you pull up color bars, and then you had to adjust the black levels, brightness, hue, and saturation to get the color bars to line up on the scopes. And she took the vector scope, and without me knowing it, she had flipped it like, some random amount, just take the vector and flipped it. And then, so it was a trick to see if I really understood what it is I was looking at. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like setting it up. I'm like, what's going on here? And I'm looking at, and I go, boop, flip, and then boom, done. And she's like, at that moment, you were hired, Yeah. Yeah. Old stories about linear tape rooms.
So Neil was asking me backstage earlier, now that You are the CEO of Mixing Light. Can he be the vice president of Mixing Light?
What?
Right. Mo loves to throw in a bit of humor here, obviously.
It's on a more serious note, though. What does the future hold? It might be, under India at this point, I understand. But being the sole owner or sole proprietor of a company that's got a nice history and track record now, are you looking at keeping it like that, or perhaps bringing in extra skill sets to run it? Because to run it alone is quite tremendous.
There was a we've been working with a business coach for a year,
Okay.
and because we knew that as a team, we knew that Mix and Light had gotten to the point where we needed to do something, and we weren't sure what that something was. And we
Okay.
hired a business coach. And one of the books he gave me to read over the summer was a book called Who Not How. Because my entire career, I'm in my mid 50s now. My entire career was always about, I've always ran my own little
I'm sorry,
boutique.
what was the name of that book?
Who Not How.
Okay, got it.
And, all my career, after I left the big post house and went on my own in the year 2001, ever since then, I've always been a sole operator. And so I've always had to do all the stuff, how do you do this? I want a website. All right. I learned HTML. I learned CSS. I learned WordPress. Like I can work the back end of our website like you wouldn't believe. So, as a sole entrepreneur, I was very much attuned with how to do stuff as what to do. And with this business, after reading that book, the basic premise of that book is the only way to really grow a business is to bring in people who know how to do the how better than you. So if you need someone to help you with copywriting, you could take all the copywriting courses. You can do all the copywriting yourself, or you can hire a copywriter and then check his work, right? And that's my approach going forward. Is one of the beautiful things about stepping into a company that's 9 years old. I've got a revenue stream I understand. I know profit and losses. I know how much money I have to spend. And I know without a doubt that I can bring people in to cover the how. And so, yeah, absolutely. I am looking at building out an actual business. Initially it'll be largely, 1099, freelance staff, people who come in on a contract basis. But the intention is to grow the bottom line to the point where those positions become permanent positions, staff positions.
Yeah, sure.
And so that's absolutely the goal, is for me to surround myself with people who are really good at the how of what they do. And then allow me to focus on the member experience and, frankly, the contributor experience.
That's amazing.
Patrick is wonderful to work with as a boss, because my work over at Mixing Light has been to discuss how to do color correction in Premiere Pro when you have to do it in Premiere Pro and can't do it in a real color correction application. And Patrick is very, very good at the verbiage, at the wording. And I'm a guy that was an English lit major in college, and I'm used to writing copy and everything. Patrick is really good at taking a nicely written explanation of something and going, yeah, but let's think about how we're going to rephrase this so that it is both said quicker and also it catches the interest better of the person reading it. And so he's done an incredible job of suggesting edits to my articles and to the way I'm approaching things. So he's very good at that. And so when he says he's going to be bringing in people that to handle various skills, well, he has a rather good set of skills for sitting over the top and looking at what his contributors should be doing. So.
And at any stage, Patrick, are you going to be focusing primarily on mixing, on coloring, or are you going to diversify a little bit into perhaps the post-production world as well? Not that the coloring is not part of post, but just different facets of it, I guess.
Well, I've been thinking a lot about that, and my thinking is still evolving on it as to how mixing light is going to continue to evolve. It will be evolving. I kind of feel like, so there's the short term and the long term goal, and I would say that long term, you look at DaVinci Resolve, right? I mean, when I started, it only did color grading. Like, it didn't even have a multi-track timeline. Like, you couldn't actually edit audio on it, right? When I started working on DaVinci Resolve. Now it's a full-blown standalone digital audio workstation. It's got two completely different nonlinear editing environments. It's got its own standalone and integrated visual effects workflow, as well as a very full-featured, very mature color grading environment. Looking forward, I just kind of look at those, those tabs on that software, and I'm like, we could go in these directions if we want to. Where we go with it, the time frame we go with it, how deep we go into some of these related crafts, I'm not entirely sure yet. A lot of it will depend on finding the right set of contributors who can speak to those. And if I feel like I've got a couple people who can start picking up some of these things, then I think it's just a natural extension of the work that we're doing there. As a colorist, so much of what I do as a colorist is dependent on what's done before me.
Yes.
And if I can help the people before me be better at their craft, and while teaching them how to prep it for the people they're handing off to, that's a win-win for everyone. And so I do see mixing light as having the opportunity to go there if we choose to go there. We do a little bit of that already. We cover some editing already. We cover some fusion. We haven't covered audio mixing. So I definitely think that that would certainly be a logical extension. The time frame of that, I'm not sure. I've got some other things I need to shore up before that.
Fantastic.
One of the things that is part of Mixing Light is they have a very active Slack channel. And so you have a very active discussion by many members that have questions about, okay, I'm having a problem like this, or I'm having this thing or whatnot. And I think that's actually one of the huge benefits of Mixing Light is access to that Slack channel. But the questions that come up all the time are like, how do you bill yourself? Are you just straight a colorist? Do you consider yourself a finisher or whatnot? Because it used to be, of course, that you would go from the NLE, the editing app, to the colorist, and then it'd go back to the editor for the final finishing and adding of things. And now a lot of the times it gets to the colorist, and the colorist does the deliverables out. And so a lot of the colorists are having to work with taking VFX plates and not only color them, but add them in as a final part of it. And so it's this evolving situation as to what really is the role. Are you a colorist? Are you a look person? Are you a finisher? What? Yeah. And it's
along
changing.
those lines, Neil, and I want to take up something that Mo had mentioned earlier in the conversation about being an editor, but not really focused on the color side. And, one thing that I think, and this is how I treated color correction early in my career, was it was an adjunct to my editing career, right? So I honestly think that as a professional, having some sort of secondary skill set that you can use to enhance your primary skill is not a bad idea. And for an editor, I think understanding how to do some basic corrections so that when you're looking at a shot and the director says, do you think that's usable? Rather than having to reach out to your nearest colorist, but you be able to kind of make some adjustments intentionally, not just flailing around and seeing if you come up with something that looks good, but intentionally making a couple quick adjustments and saying, this is about what we've got. That's a valuable skill to have. Also, a lot of jobs don't have time for someone like me. It's not necessarily a budget problem. I think a lot of producers overestimate how much it actually costs to hire a colorist to do their 25-minute show. I think they'd find that most independent creative colorists are far more affordable than they think they are. But I do think that there are jobs where you just don't have the time. The deadlines are too tight. I mean, I look at news. News is the perfect example of, I watch network news. I'm like, what's wrong with you people? Like literally 45 seconds on that 2-minute spot, and you would have a measurably improved final product,
Yeah.
right? Why haven't you taught your editors how to do a basic, set your black level, set your white level, adjust your color temperature? If that's all you're doing, you're already doing an improvement over just this, whatever this is you're doing right now. And so I think that even having that basic level of skill. Now, for an editor, they could also do it fixing the audio, right? So they become an audio specialist, or maybe they become really good using a particular set of plugins that does visual effects for cutting out plates and mats and sky replacements and things like that. Depending on the kind of work you do, that might make sense. Like if you're a commercials editor and you want to do some previs work and help the client understand where you're going with it, that could be a useful add-on skill.
Certainly people can't get locked into a single avenue in the world that we live in now. You need to be building your skill set out, I think.
I think it's part of also learning what you're really good at and what you really like to do. I know that a lot of editors get attracted to color grading. I know why I got attracted to color grading. There's a certain instant gratification to it. There's, toggling the before and after. And there's also like being an editor, the ability to work one-on-one with the above the line talent is a lot of fun. To be constantly working with, the director or the producer or the executive producer, the DP, and sit down in a room with them for hours and days on end is really a lot of fun. And there's a lot of collaboration that you may not get in some of the other crafts. And so that's why I think a lot of people they migrate into color grading. I do agree that today, you always want to start out a little bit of a generalist. There's an argument as to how long in your career do you want to stay that generalist, that everything kind of person. And then eventually, there's value to specialization, but that specialization can also have a cost. You're cutting off other avenues of opportunity. And you have to decide for yourself if you can make a go of it by specializing or not.
Well, Patrick, an interesting question for you would be, in this era, that's the TikTok era, right? Instant gratification. They don't really care about what they see on screen. This generation is just a little bit different. How do you see the future of colorists not going into very specialized areas, example, TV content or documentaries or feature films? I'm talking about the general colorists. That the guy shooting on his phone, it is a mobile generation anyway. It is an Instagram generation, and the content might not be that grand, but it is still, some stuff is quite good. Do you see the future? And the question actually is the future behind what you have, which is a huge console, just maybe Basslight or whatever it is, or do you see it software going forward as being software driven? As you can see, the software is beginning to evolve rapidly.
All right. So one of the things I love about color grading, I'm going to switch cameras here, is
yes,
the environment in which I work. Right.
That's fantastic.
Like, I love this. You have no idea how much joy it gives me to sit in this chair and then put my hands out and then push all these buttons. Like the physical interaction between my hands and my eyes and focusing on the image in front of me while, there's this mechanical visual. I love it. And I would never, this is part of what attracts me to this particular career.
Sure.
But you don't need this. You don't.
Right.
And if you're just trying to be a TikTok personality, that's literally your career goal. Do you have to have a setup like this to make that happen? Absolutely not. There's all sorts of messaging, and you're probably going to find it as useful to spend your time understanding how to manage your camera and what
Right.
makes for a good looking and interesting image.
Definitely.
Visually, like how do you capture an image in an interesting way right off the bat, right? That's going to be the first thing you look at. And then once you kind of get that down and you end up coming up with your own signature and your own style, then you're going to start looking at a setup like what I have, and you'll start thinking about, all right, what else can I do to visually enhance? And that's where you're going to start looking at like the tool. Yeah, Neil, you've got the ripple.
You can start off with something like this. This is, like $350, and it gives you a whole lot of capabilities. If you learn how to set it up, it can really do a lot. But then you move up to one of these, and like Patrick was talking, ooh la la.
Yeah, so the Tangents, I mean, Tangent is a great company. They're based in the UK. They have a range of control surfaces. Look, the thing is if we talk about color grading, not necessarily the TikTok generation, but color grading, the moment you can get your hand off the mouse, I call color grading with the mouse, it's like I'm color grading with the tip of my index finger. And I can only do one thing at a time, and it's really slow and it's kind of tedious, especially if you want to look at variations of a theme, right? So a lot of what the control surface does, it's suddenly I'm now working with two hands. The software is designed to take simultaneous inputs between those hands. I can be working contrast with one hand and color balance with another hand. I can be pushing buttons that open up software panels that keep my hands on the panel. They're not on the mouse. So within a minute, if I've got 45 seconds to a minute to work on a particular shot, I can go through 9 or 10 or 15 different variations if I'm using two hands compared to a mouse, right? And that's what makes me better on a control surface. It's not that I'm a better colorist. It's that I have optimized my work environment to allow me to explore more options more quickly, settle on my approach, and then move on. Right.
Fantastic.
With my element set up here, I can at times be working 4 or 5 controls at the same time against each other to see what you get when you move these various controls against each other, and you'll get to places that you would never ever see if you're only moving one control at a time, because it's the combination of the controls against each other. And that's the kind of thing where, the gear can make a large bit of difference. It isn't just the speed; it's you can get to places that you wouldn't see otherwise.
Yeah, I agree, and I think starting with the Ripple, which is the small little device that Neil showed first, the Ripple is a great way of getting that experience. It's relatively low cost. It's portable. It takes almost no desktop space, and you can start playing with controlling your highlights against your shadows. And if you're going to do that, and even if you're color grading, my one color grading tip for the day for anyone new to color grading is work your shadows against your highlights before you hit your midtones. Don't start at the midtones. They always seem like where you want to go because they kind of go into the highlights and they go into the shadows. No, start on your highlights, start on your shadows, get those looking good, and then take a look at your midtone controls. And that would be my one big tip of the day.
Okay, that sounds like a great end, because we're coming up. We probably need to be ending the show. It's been awesome having you, Patrick. Thank you for coming.
Fantastic, Patrick. Lovely.
All right.
Lovely.
And we will sign off.
Take care, Patrick.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Patrick.
Oh, no, wait a minute.